Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. Happy to have you with us. Happy Halloween. It's the last day of October, and November starts in a big way for Penn State back in Beaver Stadium. Noon kickoff Saturday. Number 4 Nittany Lions, number 3 Ohio State Buckeyes. Let me get that right before I go any further. Number 3 Penn State Nittany Lions, number 4 Ohio State Buckeyes. No matter how you look at it, it's an epic showdown that we're set to cover on Saturday afternoon. For those of you who can make it, look forward to seeing you inside Beaver Stadium. I think it's going to be a tremendous crowd. It looks like solid weather, and we've got a lot to do in setting the stage for this matchup. On our typical Thursday episode, we're going to have Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen in just a moment. Before we get to them with our thoughts on what we witnessed and heard from the Penn State practice field on Wednesday evening and what we expect to see on Saturday, I want to encourage you to check out our episode that dropped on Wednesday morning. We had a huge recruiting preview for this weekend with Tyler Calvaruso, who does a great job covering Penn State recruiting for us on a daily basis at Lions247.com. There's already a bunch more. I think the list is cracked 100 total prospects. When Tyler was on, we were talking about 55, 60 confirmed recruits, and there are some big names, one of which we just had confirmed by Brian Doan. Matt Zoller's top 100 quarterback in this cycle for 2025. The number 1 quarterback in the state of Pennsylvania, has been committed to Missouri for some time. He will be in Beaver Stadium to get another look at Penn State on Saturday. He is one of a few potential flip targets who will be in Happy Valley, and that's without getting into all the really extremely impressive 2026 2027 recruits who are going to be in attendance. Keep tracking our recruiting coverage at Lions247.com. We're going to stick to the game, the matchup here on this episode. And additionally, last episode, we had Patrick Murphy, who does a great job covering Ohio State as an insider within our 24/7 Sports Network. He was on with us for about a half hour during that Wednesday show. So a lot to look at that episode, but a lot to look forward to right now. Without further ado, let's bring in Daniel Gallen, Mark Brennan, my colleagues at Lions 24/7. Guys, we're just about there. I was telling Daniel before we started recording, not sure how much more I can talk about this game. I'm going to have to do it here. We got a podcast to do, but we've done so much talking. I've been on a couple other podcasts. I was just on Patrick Murphy's Ohio State podcast before recording with you guys. And I'm looking forward to everybody shutting up, this thing kicking off, and us to really see what these two teams are made of. Daniel, this is a Saturday, why you fall in love with college football.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, not really knowing what to say about it anymore, talking about it so much. You think back to when the schedule was released, however many months ago or last year, we've been looking at this game as a potential pivot point in the season, something that has both the Big Ten and the college football playoff implications, and we're finally here. And it's exciting. I think that over the course of the grind of the season, especially coming off a bit of a tough travel weekend last week in Wisconsin, that you can feel a little beaten down at this time of year, but hearing some of the players talk about the excitement they have for this weekend, really digging into the matchup, looking into all the stuff that's going on around this game with big noon kickoff, ESPN College Game Day, etc. It's easy to get excited, and I'm really looking forward to Saturday. I need groceries, so I really got to knock that out Thursday night before everyone comes to town Friday. But it's going to be a great time.
A lot of buzz around campus this week that will continue to intensify as we get closer to Saturday. This is the first time in 11 games where Penn State is not the favored team in terms of the betting spread. The Buckeyes, as of last check on Thursday, favored by 3.5 points coming on the road. Nittany Lions aim to snap a 7-game losing streak in this series. They are 1-11 in the last 12 matchups against the Buckeyes. Mark, you've covered all 12 of those matchups. Before we get into this one, I want you to make the people fully aware of how they can get the most from our coverage in the upcoming days.
Yeah, you mentioned it, and I'm not going to go back and reiterate every bit of recruiting information that we've had, but it's been a ton on the site. And as people know, a lot of that info, a lot of those stories, that content is VIP content. And if you want to get the most out of the site, you can get on board now for 50% off. It's about our regular annual price. It's about $4.50 a month, less than 15 cents a day. Well worth the investment. Listen, everybody's jacked up against about this game this week, if I can spit it out. But the true fans we know follow this program 24/7 year round. And if you want to do that, come on and Join for 50% off. It'll take you through till next year at this time, and just a great deal. So so much of what we do recruiting wise is VIP, analysis VIP. You guys do a great job with the VIP notes off of practice every week, VIP discussions on the message boards. So I'm not going to go overboard with this, but check it out. It's a great deal. And we're just telling people, listen, we know the eyes of the college football universe are on Penn State football right now, but the true fans, you're following it every little detail year round. And the best way to do that is with the subscription to Lions 247.
We are locked in on a daily basis. We're at every event you can imagine that takes place. And additionally, this isn't just 50% off for the rest of this season. It's 50% off through next October.
Right.
So you are set for all the recruiting coverage, all the transfer portal coverage, all of basketball season. These guys are going to do a great job covering
NFL draft. I mean,
there's a ton of stuff. So I think that's enough, but we'll remind folks at the very end because we'll remind folks at the very end.
And we have the ticker going across.
Yes, that's right. It is on the bottom there. So let's get into this week here in Happy Valley before we talk about the specifics of this matchup. And there were a lot of injury-related situations to track, starting with quarterback Drew Aller. And boy, do we get a pretty positive indication of where he may be trending based on our weekly 15-minute look at the Nittany Lions Wednesday evening, Daniel.
Yeah, I think coming in, we were really curious to see what we would get out of Drew Aller during this little window. And I know you spent most of the time over there watching him, Tyler, but it seemed like it was business as usual for Drew Aller. We've seen it before where there's a little bit of question about an injured player, and we just sort of figure that Penn State will trot them out there. And even if they aren't necessarily doing a lot of stuff, by being there, they know that we'll report their presence with all the caveats here and there. And it gives your opponent something to think about. But what we saw from Drew Aller going through ball security work, going through drills with the wide receivers, he looked like Drew Aller. He did typically the full workload that we would see during that about 15-minute window on Wednesday nights.
Yeah, and I mean, Mark, right when we got in there, we saw him running through simulated contact during ball security work, diving on top of pads. Then he was working in tandem with the running backs in some rush attack drills. And then he was throwing the ball. And he threw a couple deep passes, one of which deep to Harrison Wallace, drew some praise from James Franklin. You had Brennan Cam glued on number 15. We have video footage of that over at Lions247.com. So what did you make of what we saw from Aller?
He looked like he always looks in practice. And so make of that what you will. I mean, we typically don't see them sprinting, at full speed. But if you watched in the game against Wisconsin late in the first half after he got bumped up, he was really having trouble planting and stuff. I mean, you could see, he had completed 12 of 13 passes, I think it was, to that point. And the one incompletion was a drop by Julian Fleming. And then all of a sudden, he just didn't have his base. And again, from what we could see there with no contact or anything, it looked like he was perfectly fine throwing the ball. Again, we did not get an opportunity to see him sprinting at full speed. We never do at practice. Mm-hmm. He did some handoff stuff and some option stuff. I don't think I'm violating any rules there because we've seen all of that in games now. So, long story short, he looked like Drew Aller usually looks. One thing that I did think was interesting, and I'm sorry I forgot to pass this along, but in going back and looking at the video, there was one drill where they did a certain route. I'm not going to say what it was, but Aller took 3 reps on that route. Bo Pribula took 1 rep, and then Grunk took 1 rep. So again, make of that what you will. That isn't really different from what we would usually see, other than Grunk getting that 1 rep. But the fact that Aller did 3, Pribula 1, Grunk 1, again, make it but what you will. I know I keep saying that, but I'm afraid to tell people to put too much into watching that video. But I also think there's some substance to what you see out there on the field.
Ethan Grunkemeyer, the freshman quarterback, was wearing number 18. So he's playing the role of Will Howard this week on scout team. James Franklin alluded to that after practice because there was some conversation early in the week where Grunkemeyer might have to find a way to fit in if he's going to be your potential QB2 without Aller. good sign that it seems like he's kind of back to the side in the quarterback conversation regarding Aller and Prbula. But I think it's worth noting here, there was a few years ago, you guys were both in the stadium for that Illinois game, and it was an ugly one. But Sean Clifford started that game coming off his injury against Iowa. I mean, does he start that game if they have more confidence in the backup quarterback situation? You wonder, because he was clearly a limited version of himself. And so I think, like we heard from James Franklin in postgame, Daniel, there's going to be a continuation of honest dialogue between the coaching staff, the training staff, and Drew Aller, because it's not just about having him lined up behind center. It's about him being out there and being able to do what he needs to do for Andy Kotelnicki's offense to flourish. And that's kind of a separating factor, something we can't quite pick up on the practice field because we didn't see him cutting. We didn't see him facing live ammunition from a defense. And that's something that kind of ties into what James Franklin continues to call a game time decision.
Definitely. I think the limitations that could be on Aller definitely are something that you have in mind. But at the same time, given what Beau Prbula did in that second half against Wisconsin, and just given the experience that he's been able to bank over these past 2 years, even though much of it has been either in garbage time or as a change of pace quarterback, those reps still count, and you can still use those for experience. So, I think that the 2021 conversation has come up a little bit. And at this point, Prbula is way more experienced than Taquan Roberson ever was at Penn State. And I think that that's something that you can lean on and you can rely on. What capacity Drew Aller is at and what the number is. Like, do you feel like 75%, 80%, 85% of Drew Aller is what you want to roll with? But if you do have to make a decision, I think that you do feel good about what you have with Prbula. It changes things a little bit for the Ohio State defense. You've given them a little bit more or a little bit of a different look to prepare for this week. So there's a lot of, I think, unique factors that are going into this right now. But I'm still waiting to see 11:35 or 11:40 when they put the names up on the big board. I think that that's really what I have my watch set to right now in terms of this decision.
Yeah, if it is a LAR, there will be a roaring ovation from the Beaver Stadium crowd. But I think even Prbula will get a nice ovation because of what he was able to do last week in that second half. And Drew Aller really seems to be taking steps game by game by game. Remember, he was 14 of 18, drop factored in there. It was halfway to 300 yards again on the road at Wisconsin before he kind of had to put things on pause. We'll see if his progress picks up against Ohio State. Moving over to the offensive line in another injury situation we're monitoring, Anthony Donko was dressed in full uniform. He was a practice participant, but guys, I would qualify him as limited based on what we viewed. I did see him take a rep with the offensive line, but he was not involved in one-on-ones against defenders when that started toward the tail end of our observation period. And additionally, just watching him jog over from the corner of the field where the offensive linemen are all the way across the field to where the defensive linemen were. He fell to the back of the pack. He was moving gingerly. Again, this is a situation where he was out for the majority of the Wisconsin matchup. He was out for the majority of the UCLA matchup. He did come back in and play some extra offensive lineman role at Wisconsin, but it was the Nolan Rucci show at right tackle the rest of the way with him sidelined. And Mark, I think through things here, and it may be a pessimistic tone, but if you have Drew Aller a little bit scaled back on his mobility, and you have a question at right tackle with Anthony Donko's health, that's a concerning combination right now as you work your way to take on the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think it was a good thing that Rucci got in there and got a bunch of snaps against Wisconsin, and I think he played fairly well. So that part of it, I think, is good. The difference with this position is, I want to put this the right way. If you look at tight end, you have Tyler Warren, and then you have everybody else. If you look at right tackle, you have Donko and Rucci, who I don't think there's that much of a gigantic gap. I mean, Donko clearly has been the better player because when he's healthy, he started. But I don't know that there's that much of a drop-off. And I'm saying that because I'm guessing out at Wisconsin, based on what we saw, that Donko probably could have played. But they were thinking Donko at 90% or whatever isn't quite as good as Rucci. So I think this is a little bit different than some of the other situations that we're talking about. But I think they're fortunate to have Rucci. Your point, though, Tyler, I think having as many healthy offensive linemen as possible is key, because what have we seen with this team when they're able to rotate the offensive linemen in? Even if it's Donko and Rucci playing, Donko playing 80%, Rucci 20%, Cooper Cousins rotating in, who else is rotating in? To me, that's what has made them so effective in the fourth quarter of some of these games. And in what's going to be a physical game, I think that would be important. But I don't know that this would be as significant as, losing one of your skill players. That's no offense to anybody, but I think Rucci's playing well enough that he's going to be able to do a decent job.
One area that Anthony Donko has really excelled at is as a run blocker. So
Yeah.
you take him out of the equation there, I do wonder a little bit. But to your point, Rucci has been logging a lot of snaps. This is a guy who has a former 5-star prospect, didn't see much of the field on game days at Wisconsin. That has changed in a big way here in his fourth year at the college level. He has 4 of the first 7 games this season. He played at least 25 snaps. So he should be seasoned up if he has to step up at right tackle again. Now, we've talked about what looked to be a full go guy, kind of a limited guy, and then an absent one now. We did not see defensive end Dani Dennis Sutton at practice on Wednesday during our 15 minutes out there. He was somebody who tried to give it a go in the second half. He was out there for the first defensive snap. It seemed to be a groin issue based on what we witnessed there at Wisconsin and kind of how he was dealing with it. But he has been very disruptive in Big Ten play for the most part. Him and Abdul Carter really kind of gaining steam together, it seemed, early in conference action. And right now, with him unavailable, at least during our period, we know he's spending a lot of time in the training room. But if he was unavailable, Daniel, that brings a couple veterans to the forefront, but also a freshman in Max Granville.
Yeah, I think when you talk about Dani Dennis Sutton being absent, you really have to add in that 15-minute window caveat. And we know that based on when we get there, certain players are put in different areas, and there's a little bit of a shuffling that happens when the media comes in and a little bit of a shuffling after we leave.
And he has played 30-plus college games at this point. He's got a lot in the bank that maybe it's okay to miss a practice session or two.
Definitely, and I think that's what James Franklin alluded to Monday in terms of talking about taking things up down to the wire with Dennis Sutton and also Drew Aller. But with no Dani Dennis Sutton there, you got a good look at Amin Vanover and Smith Vilbert. Those are 2 guys that are going to be a big emphasis if Dani Dennis Sutton can't go, or even if he's limited. I think that Penn State has liked what they've gotten out of those guys this year. I think James Franklin said that Vilbert is on the rise a little bit. He had to reshape his body after he was originally projected to switch to defensive tackle during the offseason. And we've heard a lot of really good things from Amin Vanover. Drew Shelton on Wednesday was talking about just how relentless Vanover is, and that's kind of the personality that he brings to that defense that I think is a little bit different. And we've talked about it. He doesn't really have those counting stats this year, but if you look at the PFF, and you can put as much stock into that as you want to, but he shows up on there, in terms of pressuring the quarterback and being around him. Max Granville is an interesting equation, and it's kind of a fun contrast because you've got a 6th-year senior in Smith Vilbert, 5th-year senior in Amin Vanover, and then you have this 18-year-old freshman who's supposed to be a senior in high school right now. So you really run the gamut in terms of experience in that defensive end group. And we've heard some good things about Granville, and I think that in terms of things to watch for on Saturday, that's a very interesting subplot. I know that there's going to be millions of people watching this game, and I don't think a lot of them will be concerned with the redshirt status of the 5th or 6th defensive end on the Penn State roster. But for us and the people who follow this team closely, it's going to be pretty compelling to see, if they decide, all right, we're going for it with Granville, or all right, we're still going to manage this guy. We still want to keep that red shirt for him. We still want to let him develop. We'll see what this really looks like.
I would imagine with 2 games now under his belt, there's a little bit of wiggle room, not much, but I'd imagine that the mindset needs to be what will help us beat Ohio State on Saturday. And especially if Dani Dennis Sutton is not able to go, or if he's limited. And Max Granville's a guy, it may only take like a half dozen snaps for him to make his mark as a speed rusher, maybe in an obvious passing down. that's all it could take for him to kind of come up with a play that could help Penn State. So something to keep tabs on there. We also did not see Quentin Martin Jr., the freshman running back, who's been operating as the third running back behind Nick Singleton and Katron Allen for much of this season since Cam Wallace went down with an injury in September. Martin was not with the team at Wisconsin. He was not in the practice field last week either. So something that's starting to become a bit of a storyline. And when you look beyond those primary two running backs now, you wonder who's next up. It's a group of walk-ons. You've got Tyler Holsworth, who's gotten some game action. And then you got the freshman Corey Smith, who came to campus in the summer, has done some nice things, has not worked in a game yet. But we'd imagine that he might be that next man up if Quentin Martin was not available thus far. And I know I saw Smith in a scout team jersey on the practice field on Wednesday. Something else that stood out this week is Will Howard being, pretty explicit after Ohio State's latest matchup that, Penn State didn't necessarily want him coming out of school as a Pennsylvania high school quarterback. There were power conference opportunities. He found one at Kansas State, ends up transferring to Ohio State. I made the point to Patrick Murphy when we were discussing this on the last episode that Ohio State didn't want him either coming out of high school. They didn't offer him, but they ultimately liked him enough in the transfer portal to bring him on board. He's playing really well, but we got a little more insight on his game, his mindset from a former high school teammate, Drew Shelton, who was a starting left tackle for Penn State. Daniel, going back to you, you had a story up on Thursday about this. What did you learn about Will Howard from that conversation?
Yeah, it's been pretty funny to hear some of the conversations about Will Howard using these slights as motivation and everything. And I think that trying to point out, it's like, well, Ohio State didn't want him either. It's like, well, that doesn't matter right now. What matters right this week is that Penn State didn't want him coming out. And also I appreciate a little bit of candor, a little bit of brashness. It feels like a lot of times these programs can be really, really buttoned up, and coming into press conferences, a lot of times you feel like you don't get anything interesting. And that was finally something pretty interesting, especially in a post-game environment. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. Drew Shelton, Penn State starting left tackle, and Will Howard were teammates at Downingtown West for 2 years. Shelton was class of 2022. Howard was class of 2020. And Shelton says he goes way back with Howard, that they grew up together playing basketball, playing football, playing baseball. He said doing everything, sports-wise together. And he talked a lot about the intangibles and the leadership of Will Howard. He told a story about the Downingtown West season opener in 2019. They were playing Garnet Valley, who Shelton called one of the better PIAA teams in their area. And Shelton said it was the fourth drive of the game. It was his first time playing on the offensive line. Things weren't really moving for them. And they're in the huddle, and Will Howard is just like, I got you guys. Like, that's fine. Like, we're going to keep this together. We're going to stay steady, and we're going to get this done. I went and found the box score, and the final score was 42-19. Downingtown West, rolled, and they made it all the way to the PIAA semifinals that year in Class 6A. They finished with a 13-2 record. So I think the one thing that Shelton really leaned on was how calm and composed Will Howard can be. And when you talk about coming into Beaver Stadium, which is probably going to have at least 110,000 people in it, when you talk about capacity and attendance, you're going to need to be composed. You're going to need to be unfazed when it comes to some of these things. So I thought that feedback, while it wasn't necessarily, well, he throws this route good or he does this thing really well, I thought that was a really good overall piece of feedback from Shelton about Howard that is going to be useful on Saturday.
He did say he has not heard from Will Howard, his former teammate, this week. They're on opposite ends of a big matchup, and I think they're respecting that. But yeah, we'll keep tabs, because Will Howard, I think a lot of people, fair or not, this season probably remember him for sliding as time expired on the road in Eugene, 1-point loss to Oregon, and didn't seem very self-aware, didn't seem very in control of the situation. But overall, you look at his body of work at Ohio State, I know they're very pleased with what they've gotten from the quarterback position, and Penn State's defense will try to change that up this week. Mark, the other note I wanted to get into here from the week and all the conversations we've had, and a lot of just picking up the vibes of this squad right now. Man, the psychology of this team for Ohio State matchups is just different than any other game on the schedule. It's been that way for a while now. but it's easy to detect. And something stood out to me, Mark, talking to Devon J. Thomas, who's a real heart and soul guy for this team. He's 0-5 in his career against Ohio State. He's a 6-year senior, and he talked about the PJ Mustafers, the Jair Browns, the Sean Cliffords that have been so key to this roster over the years, but never got a win for in this matchup. And ultimately, in some way, shape, or form, this era of Penn State football has been defined by that shortcoming. So how much do you think they need to use that as fuel? And how much do you think the past needs to stay to the side when this thing gets going on Saturday?
How about getting a win for James Franklin? I mean, to me, this game means more to him than anybody else. Penn State could lose this game and still get into playoffs, but if they lose this game, you know what the criticism is going to be, that James Franklin can't beat Ohio State. So to me, that's more about it than PJ Mustafa or Sean Clifford. I think they have to just not even worry about this. You know, to me, one thing I've said this whole season, guys, last year we saw a certain swagger and bravado and attitude from the defense throughout the season. This year, we're seeing that same thing from the offense. I can't remember the last time we saw that, maybe with Trace McSorley, just because McSorley was who he was, and then being fortunate enough to have, Saquon Barkley and Godwin and Gesicki and whoever else, even though their offensive line wasn't that great. But we've seen it from the offense, and that, to me, is more important than winning it for whoever. Let's see if they have it in this big game, though, because we've seen seasons before where they've kind of looked a little bit like this until they get to that first big hurdle, and then it disappears. So to me, that's the psychology, the attitude, all of those things that they have to take into this game. I remember, and I know I always date myself, but that game in '94 when they kicked the living crap out of Ohio State, that Penn State team didn't care. Whatever Ohio State was rated, Penn State went out there, and this is what we're going to do. This is where we're going to play. This is our house. We're going to do it our way. That's the sort of thing you need to see. I'm not saying that they have to go out there and blow them out, but you have to go out there and play with that sort of attitude. And I think if they do, they'll be in good shape. I just don't know. I mean, I don't want to forecast my prediction here, but how many people have said, we'll believe it when we see that they do it. They have the ability. I mean, we've seen it in spots this year from this team. We've seen it in clutch games. But to me, Tyler, that's more the psychology than winning it for the Gipper.
Well, I bring that up because out of all the conversations we've had, all the different angles we've had at Ohio State, I have not seen emotion worn by a player or coach this week in the way that Devon described the classes that have come through here and ultimately left campus without ever tasting an Ohio State victory.
Right. Well, he's also a veteran, Tyler, and he knows how to deal with us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think some other players may not be as comfortable, saying that sort of thing. But I would still say, hey, if that's what's going to drive you, great. If you want to go out and win it for PJ, great. I mean, I think that's tremendous. But more important to me is just playing with the attitude that you don't care who it is. You don't care who you're winning for. You're Penn State, and you want to go out there and get it done.
I got multiple texts from parents of class of 2019 recruits the night that James Franklin made his great to elite speech after a loss to Ohio State. Both of those players became Penn State starters. Both of those players were multi-year starters. Both of them thought they were going to be part of the solution after seeing that speech and coming to campus. They left without beating Ohio State. I just think that is a significant hole in this entire regime right now, is the fact that I don't have that. So I wanted to bring that up, and there's a lot of reasons why this team should be motivated to beat Ohio State. And let's jump into some of the key matchup storylines here. Daniel, I think right off the jump is, regardless of Drew Aller starting, not starting, playing extensively, being limited, Bo Prabula is going to have a role. That's been a week-to-week staple. But after what we witnessed last week, and considering Andy Kotelnicki just feels like the kind of play caller who is going to take his shots in this kind of a setting, what is your expectation for Bo Prabula if Drew Aller is the starter on Saturday?
Just to go back real quick to what Mark was saying about winning one for the Gipper, last night Jalen Reed was just like, I can't go 4 years without beating them. So that was someone that was had their focus in the building.
Win one for Jalen.
But no, I mean, I think that with Bo Prabula, we're going to see him no matter what. I think that through the first 6 games of the year, Andy Kotelnicki did a really nice job of working him into the offense. I know we talked about it where at times last year when we saw Pribula come onto the field, it felt stilted, it felt forced. It didn't really feel it to be like in the flow. I think that we've gotten to the point this year where there's certain times he comes into the game and you don't really notice it until you look up or you hear the press box announcer that there's a new quarterback in the game, and it's just kind of like, oh, okay, like this is that part of the playbook. I think that coming off of last week, beyond Aller's health and that part of it, I do think that the Pribula usage becomes even more intriguing because he put more of that stuff on film in terms of some of the passes he hit, in terms of operating a little bit more like a quarterback within the flow of the offense, as opposed to just a gadget player when he was out there. I thought that that's something that was really notable to build off of after last week. So we'll see. I mean, I do feel like we're going to see him, and I feel like even if Aller starts and Penn State does a pretty typical game plan or usage, I still feel like we might see a little bit of an uptick in Pribula, both because of Aller's health and maybe wanting to limit some hits or limit his exposure, but also I don't want to say it's to reward Pribula from last week, but just to build off of what you showed last week and how you can do a little bit different things with him in there. I thought that was just something that stood out to me with how that offense operated. I think Andy Kotelnicki is maybe the X factor in this for Penn State. I mean, you look at kind of what's the biggest difference between last year's team and this year's team, and it's that offensive coordinator spot. And I think Kotelnicki has shown that he can use these guys in different ways, that he's going to be prepared. And I think also his presence and demeanor is something that can come in handy in a big game like this. He doesn't strike you as someone who is going to tighten up. He doesn't strike you as someone who's going to turtle when it comes down to it. And I think that's something that can be really beneficial to Penn State.
That you reminded me of something else that Devon J. Thomas said. He said he doesn't remember the staff being this confident and cohesive going into an Ohio State matchup. He says there's just they seem a lot more at ease. And considering what we kind of picked up from the offense last year, at least, that's not a surprise that has changed. But I thought that was an interesting note. And I will say one thing that Bo Pribula could do for you here, if it's not working in the first half or in the first quarter, he could help you jumpstart that running game. I mean, James Franklin brought that up in postgame on Saturday night, that Nick Singleton and Katron Allen are just going to have better opportunities because of the rushing threat that Bo Pribula presents, the resources that you've got to invest as a defense in handling that. And running backs have not been productive during this losing streak, guys. They have collectively reached 75 rushing yards only once in 7 losses. They did it in 2022 when Katron Allen and Nick Singleton were freshmen. But, Miles Sanders has come through here, Saquon Barkley, Journey Brown. There's been a lot of talented backs, and they've all struggled and sputtered essentially against Ohio State. So my thought is maybe if that's the case early on, Bo Pribula could give you a little bit of a jolt in that department for a play or two, and maybe you can build off of that. I think the trenches, that's where this game was lost early on in this losing streak. I mean, maybe you could say the entire losing streak, but Mark, looking back at that 2017 game at Columbus where the Buckeyes came back and Penn State could not get milk any clock because they couldn't pick up a first down on the ground, even though they had Saquon Barkley and Trace McSorley in the backfield. We've seen, the way the game ended in 2018, where Penn State's offensive line gets embarrassed on the final offensive play and Miles Sanders gets tackled in the backfield and so on and so forth. But has there been a shift? I mean, we've talked about it a bunch, how the offensive line has performed in recent seasons. This defensive line, I know denied Dennis Sutton's status is up in the air, but there is some star power. There is also some depth there. And additionally, you factor in that they've been a bit underwhelmed by what Ohio State's defensive line has accomplished through 7 games. And they're down to their third option at left tackle, it seems, going into this matchup when they started the season with the projected first rounder at left tackle. They may be shuffling up their offensive line this week. So do you think there may be a shift happening that going toward Penn State versus where this series has been for so long?
Yeah, I just think for Penn State in general, you touched on it, the depth, right, on both sides. I mean, when you're losing those games late, I hit on it a little bit earlier with Rucci and how good it would be if you have Rucci and Donko that you could rotate those guys. But, 2 or 3 years ago, if they lose their starting offensive tackle and a starting defensive end, they're in trouble. I mean, at Wisconsin, I mean, they're in trouble, and they were able to put people in there to make up for it. And that's big, not only in this game. And I agree with you. I do think you are seeing a bit of a shift, but in the course of a season, when, if you're fortunate enough to make the college football playoff, there is going to be a measure of attrition. And, we've already seen it this year that the teams with the greater depth, and that's what's going to set Penn State apart, I think, offensive line-wise in this game, is that Penn State does have better depth, and Ohio State doesn't quite have the depth. So I do think that that's kind of been a paradigm shift, if you will, for these programs. And I think it speaks to the job that Troutwine has done with Frank Leonard and that Deion Barnes has done, and the job they've done recruiting. I mean, the offensive line is really hard to recruit because there are guys who could dominate at the high school level, and they get to this level and all of a sudden they're playing against guys who are their size, and it's a completely different thing. And they're not hitting on every single one, but the last few years they've been hitting on a higher percentage. And I think that's been one of the keys to developing that depth. And then over on the defensive line, listen, you look at what they have at defensive tackle. You mentioned Devon a bunch. Obviously, Zane Durant's playing well. But look at all the guys they're rotating in behind them. I mean, they are just hitting you with levels and levels and levels of talent. And again, you get to the fourth quarter, you get to late November, that's when those things are important. So I think both of those things will bode well for Penn State in this game.
Daniel, going to the perimeter of this matchup, we have been largely impressed by Penn State's new look cornerback group. I call it new look because they lost the top three guys from that group last year. But this is clearly a jump up in competition. It always is when you're talking about the receivers from Ohio State. But Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, a little more established products, especially Egbuka. Some people thought he'd be in the NFL by now. But Jeremiah Smith has really changed the dynamics there. James Franklin said Wednesday night that he has validated all the hype that he had as the number one overall recruit in the country coming out of high school. As a freshman, through 7 games, he's already tied Ohio State's freshman receiving touchdown record with 8 of them. What do you make of this matchup?
It's going to be a really, really interesting one. And I think when you look at what Penn State did in the portal in terms of bringing in A.J. Harris and Jalen Kimber and really reinforcing that cornerback group, you kind of look at a game like this as a reason for doing that you want to have as many bodies as possible to throw at these receivers. I know that we saw it last year in terms of what Marvin Harrison was able to do and how he was pretty much the difference in that game. I think that a lot of stuff was going on that day in Columbus, but if you really wanted to boil it down to things, Ohio State had Marvin Harrison Jr. and Penn State did not. And that was worth, I forget whatever the final margin was, but that was definitely worth that many points. I think that this Ohio State wide receiver group is still really, really good. Egbuka's been doing this for a long, long time. He's done some very nice things. Carnell Tate, I thought last year, you looked at him and you were like, oh man, like this guy's the future. And then this year you have another future come in with Jeremiah Smith and what he's been able to do. I thought Jalen Reed had kind of a funny quote talking about Jeremiah Smith, where he had a lot of praise for those guys, a lot of respect for them. He said that this is one of these matchups. This is why you come to Penn State. This is why you want to play in the Big Ten. But someone asked him for like a scouting report on Smith or why Smith was having success. And he was just like, well, he's 6'4", 220 pounds, and he's 18 years old. Like, just look at him. Like, he's like, that's the body of work. That's why these things are happening. So I'm very, very intrigued by this. Like I said, Harrison Kimber, I think that you're going to see a lot of them. We've seen Zion Tracy's role expand a little bit, and he's one of those longer, physical, speedy corners. He could be an intriguing piece in this game. Cam Miller's done this for a long time. Can Dejon Lane be playable on the back end as a true freshman to free up Jalen Reed a little bit? Can Zachy Wheatley be the turnover king and help swing this type of game? I think that there's a lot of different storylines on the back end, but I'm really excited for this matchup. I think that the past couple of years we've seen it when this Ohio State offense is clicking and when these wide receivers are making those game-changing plays. It can be really cool to watch. It can also be incredibly frustrating when it's happening against your team. and against your defensive backs. So I'm excited. I'm really looking forward to seeing Jeremiah Smith in person and validate some of that hype, I guess. But should be a fun matchup. And I thought it was neat to hear Jalen Reed frame it as, we're excited for this opportunity. This is what you want to be here for.
Elliot Washington's getting like starters reps these days as well as a sophomore. He's been playing a ton. Another guy who's got the speed and the length in that defensive backfield. By the way, there's familiarity with these running backs on the Penn State defensive side of things. We heard from a few defenders this week. They faced Kinshawn Judkins in the Peach Bowl. It took him about 34 carries to get 106 yards. So they largely bottled him up, but he just kept getting the ball that day. And within 2 weeks, he was all of a sudden heading to Columbus as a transfer. And then Travion Henderson's a guy who really burst onto the scene as a freshman 5-star. He had 150 rushing yards, I think, his freshman year in 2021 against this team. Wasn't available for the matchup last year, but this will be his third time playing Penn State. And I think Devon J. Thomas said, you don't bottle them up, it's going to be issues. You can't let them find free space. So there's a lot to deal with on the Ohio State offense, as there always is, though we do wonder if the offensive line for the Buckeyes is maybe a little bit below the level it's been at in some of those other matchups that have taken place between these two squads. Going to be a spotlight on a lot of different spots for Penn State, but Mark, sure seems like a good opportunity for the receivers to show that they have and will continue to take steps forward. It hasn't been a one-man show. It's been 4 guys involved on a consistent basis, with Omari Evans pacing as the 4th guy. We've seen some take their turn. Tyler Warren has been the primary target in the pass game, but against this team, I don't care who's playing quarterback for you at Penn State. You're going to need to win some matchups down the field, get vertical a little bit, keep Ohio State's defense honest, which you could not do in any way, shape, or form last year. That ultimately cost you the ability to run the football. I think the key is letting yourself run the football when you need to. And in order to get there, receivers are going to have to make plays downfield.
Yeah, sorry for dropping out there. My email was beeping, and I went to quit out of email, and I quit out of Chrome instead. So I'm an idiot, and I just want to confess that was not a technical glitch. It was a Brennan glitch. But you look at the Oregon game. Okay, I have the box score up now. Evan Stewart, long catch of 69 yards for a touchdown. Tez Johnson, long catch, 48 yards for a touchdown. 4 catches of longer than 30 yards. I don't care who makes the plays for the receivers. They're going to have to take some deep shots and make some deep catches, to get back to your point, Tyler, to keep that defense honest and open things up for the rushing game. That's been one of the things that's been missing kind of in this series. So when you look at what Oregon was able to do, and Oregon's obviously a gifted team with very good receivers and a very good quarterback, but Penn State doesn't have to take a backseat to anybody at quarterback, especially if Aller's playing. Can Prabula throw it that far down the field? I don't know, but you have the catch and run aspect. But I don't care who it is. To me, it could be a guy like Omari Evans, because we know he has that downfield ability to get down there, or Harrison Walls. But you have to take those shots and make at least a couple of them work, because you look at what Oregon was able to do, and they were able to really exploit that in that win out in Eugene.
Yeah, and I'm glad you referenced Omari Evans, because I think I said earlier in the week he feels like a guy who is due. And I took a little bit of a closer look at the stats, and you go back. He didn't have a catch at Wisconsin. Again, he's been active every game. He's been the 4th wide receiver. He's has 3 catches for 31 yards through 4 Big Ten games. In non-conference action, 3 matchups, 8 catches, 205 yards, 2 touchdowns. So to see him maybe get a little bit of a spike back up, this is the time to do it. And of course, Julian Fleming, it's going to be a strange day for him in Beaver Stadium as part of the home team in this particular matchup. He visited multiple times as a Buckeye in his career, but could he make a play in this game that comes through? It would be quite the storyline. I want to finish before we talk about our predictions and we each pick a player to watch, Daniel, by mentioning the quote-unquote slow starts that Penn State has dealt with. I think it's a little overplayed, and I don't think it's necessarily attributed to one side of the ball or the other. But at the end of the day, they have faced a halftime deficit in about half their games. 3 out of the 7 games, they have been down at halftime. That includes the last 2 matchups. And so this seems to be a good time, this particular game, to put that in the rearview mirror, because the worst thing you can probably do for this crowd that we're expecting is give them a reason to think this one's sliding away early, have all the PTSD from the last 7 games start flooding in. an encouraging start, I think, could go a real long way to a positive and a win at the end of the day during Saturday afternoon.
Definitely. I think being able to start strong, like you said, it'll help keep the fans engaged at Beaver Stadium. And I think it'll help instill confidence in your team. We've talked about it where in these types of games, it seems like Penn State isn't often the aggressor. It feels like that they're playing a little bit more of a reactive style of football. And I think that you look at these past couple of seasons, how Penn State has performed in these Ohio State and Michigan games, they just seem to come out a little tight. And that goes beyond the slow starts this season. This is a totally different thing. And you don't want to combine having the slow starts that we've seen this season with also coming out maybe a little tight in a big game. I think that you need to come out really firing on all cylinders. And even if you aren't, hitting on, even if you are punting, even if you aren't, consistently moving the ball, I think if you're showing the signs of life and the signs of confidence, I think that's something else that can go a long way. But I've said this a couple times. I think I said it before the USC game, probably said it before Wisconsin to a lesser extent, but you get to a certain point in Big Ten play where you might dig a hole that you can't get out of. And I think that Ohio State is a team that is designed to bury you. So if you are Penn State, you do want to avoid a slow start. But I think that more importantly, I think that you just need to be loose when you come out. I think that you can't. Yeah, I think that these players, they seem relaxed. They seem to know what the stakes are, and it doesn't necessarily seem like they're letting that overwhelm them. But I think that you just need to be loose. You can't be tight. And in this type of game, super cliche, but you can't beat yourself, and you can't have the game lost when you're already out there in the first quarter.
Let's talk about players in the spotlight. We're each going to pick one of them. There are plenty to select from. We've already gone over a bunch. And Daniel, we're going right back to you to start off this one.
Yeah, we haven't discussed him yet. And so I was worried I'd be double dipping on some being redundant. But Abdul Carter, I mean, I think that this is the cliche I used last week with Jalen Reed in terms of a primetime player making a primetime play. I think that if you are Abdul Carter, this is a game where you're going to have so many eyes on you. You're getting that top 5 NFL draft buzz. Deni Dennis Sutton might not play. If he does play, he might not be at 100%. There's going to be a lot of focus on you. And this is where you need to deliver. I think that Penn State has gotten creative in how they've used him these past couple of weeks. And it's freed him up for some of those opportunities where he's almost had an interception, where he's been able to make some plays at the second level. We know that Will Howard can run the ball a little bit if they need to. We know he's mobile. He's a bigger guy. So how Abdul Carter gets matched up with him at all, I think could be a notable development on the defensive side of the ball. But I think if you're Penn State, this is a game where you want to be making plays in the backfield, whether that's tackles for loss, whether that's sacks, whether that's quarterback hits. You need to be back there. You need to be disruptive. And I think a lot of that starts with what Abdul Carter is able to do coming off of the edge.
Mark, which Nittany Lion are you focused on?
I'm going to take a little bit of a gamble here. I'm putting on my Ohio State defensive coordinator hat, like a really big hat. And if I'm looking at Penn State's offense, number one, I want to try to not let Tyler Reed have 17 catches. Number two, I'm looking at those running backs, and I don't want them to beat me. And you can't cover everybody. You can't stop everything. And I think that's going to allow a wide receiver to get open and do some things. And I am going to go with Trey Wallace to have a big game. I think he's going to get some one-on-one coverage. He's going to make some things happen, and they're going to get him the ball, maybe a couple of those downfield shots that we're talking about. So I know that's a little bit of a gamble because we've not seen one receiver really step up and do it game after game after game. It's been more by committee. But I'm going to say it's going to be a receiver, and my pick is Trey Wallace. Could be Amari Evans, but I picked Trey Wallace, so I'm going with him.
Wallace has played more than any receiver this season, 5 catches for 67 yards at Wisconsin, and he has built upon his receiving total in each of the last 4 contests. Of course, he hasn't yet matched that game 1 performance at West Virginia, but he has been a very steady presence in that receiver group. I'm going back to the Tyler Warren well on this one, guys, because he is just such a threat. And everything they put on tape, and again, I'm going to go back to Andy Kotelnicki, seems like the kind of offensive coordinator, seems like the kind of person, knowing the showcase setting, he's going to take some things out of the toolbox, and he's going to try them in this matchup. And I don't know what that means. We've already seen Tyler Warren snap the ball on a play that he caught a touchdown. So I think they already kind of peaked on that in terms of versatility. But I could see Tyler Warren being more involved at direct snap situations than we saw at Wisconsin, especially if they need a bit of a jolt on the ground, maybe on some short yardage situations. But ultimately, I think I'm just excited to see them feed Tyler Warren. I mean, they haven't gone away from him. This has been game by game by game. You're waiting for somebody to take him away. He only had 43 yards last week, I think, but he still had a team high 7 catches. He had a huge block to help spring Katron Allen for the touchdown. So between his blocking skills, his receiving skills, and maybe more importantly for Ohio State this week, to their detriment, is just the unknown factor with Tyler Warren play by play. So I think I'm going to go with Tyler Warren. I think that he is going to score at least 1 touchdown in this matchup. And I think he may have a shot to score a couple touchdowns in a couple varieties of ways, getting maybe used as a quarterback down near the goal line again, as we've seen in the past. Let's get into our predictions. And these are some really interesting ones. I know we've had 7 rounds of predictions on this show now in 2024, but I'd imagine our listeners and viewers have not been as interested in our picks as they are right now. And Mark, you're going to get us going.
I will start with my bold prediction first. Judkins, the running back, had 106 yards rushing against Penn State at Ole Miss last year in the Peach Bowl. I think the Penn State defense is going to come ready to stop him. I don't think they were happy with what happened. He's going to end up with fewer rushing yards in this game than he had carries, which was 33 in the Peach Bowl. 33 carries. That's unbelievable. But I do think the defense is going to play well. With respect to my pick, listen, last year, I think all of us were drinking the Kool-Aid, right? I mean, we all picked Penn State to win at the Horseshoe. And I think we all felt comfortable with where the team was. And I think we all kind of feel pretty good about where this team is now. But after last year, I'm going to have to see it to believe it. I love the swagger that they're playing with. I said this earlier, on both sides of the ball. I love the confidence. I love all the weapons on offense. What I don't love is the way that they've found ways to pry defeat from the jaws of victory against Ohio State the last 7 years so many times. So I'm going with the Buckeyes 27-24. Would not be surprised if Penn State wins the game, but I just have to see it to believe it anymore. I know that's cliche, but that's the point that I'm at.
Mark, or Daniel, as Mark just mentioned, we all went with the Nittany Lions last year, and we all looked a little bit silly in the aftermath, particularly because of the way the offense no-showed in Columbus. You ready to pick them again?
During our bye week episode, or we did our bye week roundtables, and my bold prediction was Penn State beats Ohio State. I made that prediction with the idea of a healthy Drew Aller, clicking on all cylinders, coming into Beaver Stadium to host Ohio State. That's not necessarily the case right now. But I think that from what we saw from Bo Pribula against Wisconsin is that we know that if Pribula has to play extended time, it's not going to be a disaster. Like I said earlier, I really think Andy Kotelnicki is the X factor here. I really like Jim Knowles as a defensive coordinator at Ohio State. So that's going to be a really fun chess match. But I just think that with how this Penn State team is playing right now, they'll have guys schemed up. They'll put players in the right positions to make plays. And I think that Penn State will end up making, 1 or 2 more plays than Ohio State. I have a final score of 24-23 Penn State. Tyler did a very nice job of teeing up my bold prediction a little bit. It's very Tyler Warren focused. This is going to be a spotlight game for Tyler Warren and for Penn State to showcase Tyler Warren. Who knows what nickname Gus Johnson will come up for him over the course of the game. And I think that Penn State is going to take advantage of that. I just got an email from Bowling Green's SID, saying, hey, Harold Fannon's a pretty good tight end. Everyone should know about him. And so I think Penn State is going to do what it can to spotlight Warren. I think Penn State will score 3 touchdowns in 24-23 game. And I think Warren will have a hand in all 3 of them, whether that's receiving, rushing, passing, snapping, handing the ball off. I don't think he'll return a kick for a touchdown, but I think that we'll see a lot of Tyler Warren, and this will be the game that at the end of the year, when you talk about the year that Warren had, this is the one that the highlights are from.
If he throws a pass, runs a touchdown, and also catches a touchdown in this game, and it's 3 touchdowns for Penn State, maybe he will get to New York City for that Heisman Trophy ceremony. I mean, that would be a hell of a thing. Appreciate your prediction. Look, I think this is the 4th time in 5 games now where Daniel and I have Penn State scoring the same amount of points. I'm a little bit different with my score, but I also am picking Penn State to win this game. I'm going 24-20. Nittany Lions overcoming that hurdle that they faced for so many years now. I already mentioned how I think things have shifted in the trenches, especially entering this matchup. Really concerned about the Buckeyes offensive line and how they'll be able to hold up in this particular game. I'm also thinking about the communication end that involves the offensive line with the crowd noise. They didn't handle that road environment too well at Oregon. They're going to have maybe some new pieces in new places, maybe a young guard stepping up, maybe a starting guard playing left tackle. So I think that's an edge for Penn State in this matchup. And where I'm also going, I think where I did it wrong last year in picking Penn State was I was projecting Penn State to go out and maybe play their best game of offense in Columbus, Ohio, because really we hadn't seen Penn State with that balanced attack with vertical passing game last year. But we went and we said they'll figure it out. They'll get it done. They'll get to the finish line. They didn't. But I think now they don't necessarily need to go out and play their best offensive game of the season. I just think they need to keep doing what they've been doing. I think there are too many players across the roster now that have proven they can be dependable. And last year, those were far and few between for this offensive attack. So I think that plus the trenches leads me to believe this could be the year for Penn State to really do it. Again, 24-20. And for my bowl prediction, I referenced this stat earlier, but Penn State running backs have combined to reach 75 yards only once in these 7 losses to Ohio State. I think collectively, the Nittany Lions will double that total on the ground Saturday. So 150-plus rushing yards. And I think Bo Prabula is going to be a big boost to that as well. Ohio State has really, really struggled against mobile quarterbacks this season, and he is the most mobile they will face. So even if it's as a gadget player here and there on the field, I think he'll get some spots, get some chunk plays, and that'll help out Nick Singleton, Katron Allen as well. Ohio State's allowing 91 rushing yards per game. So I think that's bold enough for that part of the prediction. And that's it for this week of podcast coverage of Ohio State versus Penn State pregame. We'll be back with a postgame show on Saturday following the action in Beaver Stadium. But between now and then, really encourage you to check out Lions247.com's coverage. Just as we were recording, there's like 3 more recruiting stories up on some flip candidates who are making their way to campus now. So much happening on the recruiting end. We'll have a lot of pregame coverage. There's injury issues we got to sort through, so we'll have the binoculars out. We'll be in the stadium bright and early, so follow us at Lions247.com, and you can do that for 50% off through the end of this week. So take advantage of that deal, and you'll get that 50% rate through next October. So you'll be in really good shape with us at Lions247.com. Mark, Daniel, next time I see you, we'll be in the press box. Let's see what we get out of this one. It's been a fun week of coverage, some twists and turns as well. On behalf of these guys, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.